The Oxford Group, which is the largest and most prestigious Brazilian consulting company in the United States for over 40 years, proudly presents Economy and You. Brought to you by Life. Pereira Araujo Law, 3 decades of experience in immigration in the United States.
Good evening, dear listeners. Today we have a very special program. We are at the close of Ambassador André Odenbreit Carvalho Odenbreit's tenure, here in Florida, in Miami. And we have the honor of having him on our program, where we will talk about how to manage a consulate in a business-like manner and in such a way as to meet the objectives of the consulate and the Brazilian representation. Ambassador André, what a pleasure to have you with us on the program. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be in contact and to be able to talk a little about the work of the consulate.
Ambassador, you come from a background in negotiation with extensive, deep experience, extremely valuable to the country in negotiations. Suddenly, you take charge of a consulate the size of the Brazilian consulate in Miami, which more than anything is like a company because it has many services to provide, a high demand for these services, and a huge influence on success of the Miami community itself. How did you see this challenge when you arrived? And now, as your term comes to an end, how do you see it?
Carlos, I arrived with very high expectations about what working in Miami would be like. In fact, before I arrived, I was interested in coming here because I wanted to have consular experience. As you mentioned, my background at Itamaraty is more in the negotiation area, so I've worked in the broad fields of environment and international trade. But consular work has a deeply personal and human dimension, involving constant and direct daily contact with people and their various needs. And I truly wanted to have the professional experience of actively working with and addressing that specific kind of human demand. And on the other hand, it has a fantastic characteristic, which is that the benefit you generate ends up being a very immediate benefit in people's lives. So unlike an agreement where you finish the negotiation and then it begins a ratification process, then it comes into effect, and during its validity, it will start to affect people's work. Here, constantly at the consulate, you are dealing with urgent demands that require immediate solutions right away because the person is suffering a loss or a potential loss that the consulate's action will help resolve. So in this sense, the shift to consular work was very positive and rewarding. Now, at the same time is a huge challenge due to the size of the community we have and the variety of issues we sought to address.
Mr. Ambassador, let's, if you please, help our listeners understand what areas a Brazilian consulate operates in, and then we'll get into the numbers for these areas. But what are the main areas the consulate is responsible for developing and serving the community?
Carlo, the consulate always has at its core the activities of supporting the issuance of documents, which is the work of the sector, consular work itself, and assistance to Brazilians in vulnerable situations, which is the task of the assistance sector. This is the core to which every consulate is dedicated, and I think it's something that always deserves top priority because there is no other entity that can do this work. This is what truly defines consular work. We are the only producers of these documents. We are generally the best positioned to provide support. Consular assistance? Now, in a situation like Miami, in addition to the consular sector and the assistance sector, you will have an enormous amount of work in commercial promotion because the commercial and investment relationship is so strong. The Brazilian business community currently residing in Miami is remarkably expansive and exceptionally multifaceted. And the bilateral relationship between these regions has always remained incredibly robust and enduring. It is growing rapidly. You will also have the work of the educational and cultural promotion sector, because the presence of Brazilian culture in South Florida exists even without the consulate's engagement. But when the consulate gets involved, not only does it gain strength, it also becomes something that opens doors for the Brazilian community and the Brazilian state in the jurisdiction in multiple ways. We are also seeking to start work in the area of science and technology. There was no specific sector focused on science and technology. In Miami, we created a science and technology sector because when you once again notice the strength of the Brazilian community in the jurisdiction, its presence in universities, in research institutes, in the research centers of different companies in Florida, you have Brazilians present in all these areas. So we noticed there, very much like what we used to see in the area of commercial promotion, the potential of the Brazilian community in Miami to serve as a Brazil-Florida bridge. And we decided to explore that. And in addition, we have a consulate administration sector because we have a team of more than 50 people. And that also requires a whole lot of organization, structuring, and daily processing work, which means a lot of working hours. So we dedicate ourselves to all of this. Now, that's because Miami is one of the largest consulates that Brazil has. It's one of the major Brazilian consulates in the world. And in the United States, I believe that after our embassy, our representation at the UN, and our consulate in New York, we are the largest Brazilian post here.
Yeah, if we're talking about 50 people, right? That summed up the activities very skillfully, but if we break it down, we'll see that there is an accumulation of duties and a shortage of people. Never before has the Brazilian diplomatic service faced the same challenge that the private sector deals with every day, doing more with less, accomplishing a grand task with limited resources. And we see, for example, that there is a certain accumulation there. The same person is responsible for culture, business, and trade. How does this segment, the cultural sector, which was outstanding during your administration, manage to support all this cultural development without? And then we'll move on to the commercial side. What would you highlight regarding the support the consulate provided in cultural and educational matters, Ambassador?
Well, you're right. The challenge is to be able to expand the area of activity in a situation where resources are always limited. And you can't simply inject new human and material resources to always be able to expand your capacity for action. We received a good amount of resources from Brasilia. Now, the community in South Florida, it is estimated at 400,000 people, South Florida. So it's a large group and it will generate these demands in different areas. In the cultural area, you mentioned one task is to prioritize. You have to choose which topics, where you will focus the resources you have. So we tried to work, for example, in all artistic expressions, our connections with the film industry, the literary field, we started to build a relationship with the tourism sector and a connection with the music scene, which has always been strong. All of this was maintained, but we identified the need for a very focused action in the area of Portuguese language teaching. Why? The growth of the Brazilian community will increasingly create the challenge of families who came here bringing young children or having children here. And teaching Portuguese is about preserving a cultural bond between this person, this student, and Brazil. It is also about preserving a family bond between this child and their family in Brazil through mastery of the language. This has a long-term strategic interest for the Brazilian government and for Brazilian society, which is to maintain contact between those Brazilians who live in Brazil and those who live abroad. Broadly speaking, I think Brazil increasingly needs to consider this connection between Brazilian territory and Brazilians living abroad. So teaching Portuguese was fundamental, and being able to prioritize Portuguese language teaching among the many things you're trying to do, I think a prioritization strategy is always a good idea. When you're dealing with limited resources to accomplish a lot.
Yes, education was certainly a cornerstone of your administration here. Here, where we felt your presence in the community, and particularly the preservation of Portuguese, is an added value that you provide, including to the Brazilian community and their children in the development of their professional activities in the United States and other countries. Without a doubt, this ease is invaluable. And in the economic sphere, Ambassador, you have had SECOL under your supervision during this time. How did you see the development of the community? As you mentioned, there is a diversity of companies operating here in all sectors and as a hub supporting Brazil's development, right? Because the better Brazilian companies are able to establish themselves here, the more we generate jobs and services here in general. What was your challenge in this business sector, Ambassador?
The primary challenge we are facing once again is to satisfactorily fulfill the growing demand for information, the increasing demand for professional contacts, and the significant interest in organizing and hosting large-scale events such as international trade fairs. All of this within the jurisdiction is a strong dynamic, a daily demanding dynamic. The arrival of Brazilian companies, it is a significant arrival today. What is behind this? A powerful commercial relationship. When I arrived in 2022, we had a bilateral trade flow between Florida and Brazil exceeding $22 billion. By far, Brazil is Florida's main international trading partner. And this had been growing at a certain rate. Initially, it was adding $1 billion per year, and in the end, it accelerated. So now, in 2025, we already have a bilateral trade agenda of $27 billion. This is not a number related only to what is produced and consumed in Florida. It takes as a reference what is traded through Florida. But it demonstrates the strength of a connection. And as you know very well, Carlos, when you have a strong commercial relationship, it also naturally creates a dynamic of long-term investments between both parties. Because sometimes the strategic commercial approach to effectively navigate and manage a tariff framework or complex non-tariff rules is to make a significant and strategic investment decision that allows you to strategically allocate and distribute the entire production chain between the nations of Brazil and the United States. So commercial dynamics also generate an investment dynamic. Brazilian investments in Florida, they are gaining strength. We have hundreds of companies of Brazilian origin established here, generating thousands of jobs. This is recognized by the local authorities. It's no coincidence that Florida's commercial and investment promotion agency, Select Florida, visits Brazil regularly. What is the significance of this? I believe that this Brazilian presence in Florida, seeing Florida as a gateway to the American market, also has repercussions in the Caribbean market, the Latin American market, and the global market as a whole. I think that this greater step towards the internationalization of the Brazilian economy is very positive for Brazil. It's very positive, not only in terms of discovering new markets, but also in becoming familiar with new productive practices, new regulatory realities. All of this provides valuable input for a richer discussion in Brazil about business strategies, government strategies, and the interaction between production and government. All of this, I believe, is very positive, is potentially very positive for Brazil. This strengthening of a more outward-looking approach. And I think Florida will play a fundamental role in this. It already is.
Ambassador, a study conducted by SECOM itself a few years ago said that American companies that have developed their operations in Brazil, practically the vast majority, at the time about 85% of them, had their base, at least for Latin America, here in Florida. In other words, out of the 500 largest American companies at the time, almost 470 or so had their base for operations in Latin America, including Brazil here. This relationship with the American companies that have investments, and today the United States is still the largest investor in Brazil, right? Is it also the consulate's responsibility to establish or maintain this connection with American investments in Brazil?
Above all else, Carlo, our extensive work in the area of investments is more focused on strategically directing and facilitating investments to Brazil, which I actually believe is a very significant opportunity. The side of this relationship that will now require additional focus because the relationship is growing. But I think the relationship needs to look a bit at the balance on both sides, both from a commercial standpoint, exports and imports, because today exports from Florida to Brazil are significant. Significant compared to the Brazilian exports that arrive, but above all from the perspective of investments. So we are attentive to both flows. Now, what most engages us is attracting investments to Brazil. Of course, when we are contacted by Brazilian companies interested in learning about the Florida market and what the so-called regulatory, legal, and technical requirements are for establishing themselves in Florida, of course, we work on that as well. We also address that agenda. We are here to support Brazilian companies and entrepreneurs, regardless of the direction of their business flow. But to answer your question, our main focus is attracting investments to Brazil. Yes.
And that's exactly where I think Florida plays a leading role, because at the time, with the exception of Xerox, Coca-Cola, or a few other companies that are based outside of Florida, the financial sector back then was stronger in New York. But today, Florida has gained an unprecedented level of relevance due to this flow of investment into Brazil. The companies that want to invest in Brazil, they almost always, or at least a significant number of them, have their relationship with Brazil established through their operational base in Florida. And in this, the consulate plays a key role, because I imagine that these American companies seek support, information, and guidance from the consulate. Does this also create a workload for the consulate, Ambassador?
It brings demands, Carlo. Whenever an American company makes the strategic decision that it will establish a large-scale manufacturing facility in Brazil, of course, this generates a significant amount of professional contact and a complex kind of interaction. Frequently, these specific organizations are major international companies with extensive global operations and well-defined internationalization plans. So their teams are often made up of experienced professionals in how to enter a new country and how to deal with the demands for investments established by that country. Usually, Carlos, and this applies both to the contacts we receive from American and Brazilian entrepreneurs. Very often, the consulate's work is more focused on small businesses, on small and medium-sized businesses. Major international corporations often have their own strategies, or they are integral parts of extensive national government initiatives and strategic sectoral policies, which possess specialized internal implementation channels that do not necessarily need to go through the local consulates. The typical client of the consulate, so to speak, this has been my experience over these 4 years, the typical client is someone who lacks knowledge of the market due to not having significant international experience and brings basic inquiries to the consulate, such as tariff structures, regulatory frameworks, and legal requirements. And we actively collaborate and engage with this specific segment of the market with an immense sense of professional satisfaction and confidence, because we firmly believe that supporting this vital sector of the economy has a profoundly positive and far-reaching impact, not only in terms of broader diversification, but also in the generation of new employment opportunities and the advancement of modern technology. Ever since we began to actively engage much more deeply through our specialized science and technology sector, you will notice that both Brazilian and American high-tech companies, often you are dealing with that specific group of innovative startups, small companies, and sometimes just a single founder with their unique idea seeking essential financial support, whether that is in the United States or over in Brazil. So this particular segment has been, I truly think, our primary and most important clientele for quite some time now. But again, with this characteristic diversity of Florida, covering everything from agribusiness to the service sector, from services to manufacturing, from manufacturing to high technology, intellectual property, covering all of these areas.
We have even seen companies, there are already established tech companies in Brazil that are starting to discover that the United States is a possible market, right? What used to be perhaps that the average Brazilian company had a certain reverential fear. Oh, I'm going to the United States, I won't be able to compete. Medium-sized companies in Brazil that used to be intimidated by suddenly offering a technology such as, for example, postponing the destruction of metal by rust, oil analysis technology, and so on, are now coming here believing that they can, and this feeling that they can, should generate more demand for you, because in fact the first thing they look for in terms of security, whether legal or tax information, is to know how the Brazilian authorities view this arrival, which will logically generate more results for Brazil. But I'm going to ask for 15 seconds for our commercial break, and I want to come back with you to discuss other topics.
For over 20 years, the law firm Leaf Ferreira de Araujo has been providing high-quality, customized services to professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors coming to the United States. They also represent with excellence companies employing foreigners on a temporary or permanent basis. We understand that each client's case is unique and requires a specific approach. We maintain clear and objective communication with our clients. Contact us to find out more. Lifelaw.com.
We're back now with our dear Ambassador André. Ambassador, I'd like to talk a bit about doing more with less, about the situation you encountered during your time in the consular services area. There was a demand for powers of attorney and passports that had a historical average. And suddenly, with this unusual situation, at least one we hadn't seen before, there was an increase. Please tell us, Ambassador, what happened in terms of numbers and what efforts did the consulate make to remain the most efficient consulate in the United States?
Thank you, Carlos. In fact, when I arrived in 2022, one of my first tasks was to help organize what was then our vice consulate in Orlando, which was later upgraded to a general consulate. And there was an expectation that the creation of the Orlando consulate would have an effect of even reducing the demand for consular services in Miami, because we were splitting the jurisdiction in half. We would then only be dealing with the demand from South Florida. That didn't happen. In fact, today we can say that the creation of the Orlando consulate helped a lot, but it was to contain the impact of an increase in demand. How are we doing now? With this growth of the Brazilian community within this specific jurisdiction, the overall effect of this situation, especially in terms of the growing demand for official documents, is very significant indeed. For instance, back in April 2022, we produced around 567 individual passports at the consulate office. This volume represents a substantial workload for our team. Currently, in April 25, April 26, that number is over 2,000. So it's a huge increase in demand. And this is happening in parallel with another important and impactful decision, which was the reinstatement of the visa requirement for entry into Brazil. So we are seeing a monthly average of 5,000 visas being granted to Americans interested in visiting Brazil. This is interesting as real proof of the flow in both directions. Because on one hand, you see the full strength of the demand from Brazilians who are here, but you also see the interest of Americans in visiting Brazil for a variety of reasons. So if you begin your professional career working at a busy consulate that is responsible for producing more than 8,000 documents every single month, then you will certainly need some efficiency solutions. We renewed our team, we improved procedures, we instituted and developed the use of e-consular, the online service request for services over the internet. You can request a service online and receive the document by mail. It is not necessary to be physically present at the consulate to be served. Here in Miami, we managed to achieve this. It's something unique to us for now, but we expect this to expand to other posts. Here in Miami, you can make the payment by credit card within your online process. So right after submitting your request online, you can already pay. These conveniences helped ensure the efficiency that what made our timeline not exactly the ideal one we would like. Today, the wait time for a passport is between 45 and 50 days. Until recently, our processing time was shorter, but honestly, what happened is that we started attracting more demand because of our shorter timeline. And with this increase in demand, we're starting to have a slightly larger backlog, but we are still reasonably able to ensure a level of service that, and I want to emphasize this, the community has recognized. We have received a lot of thanks, a lot of signs of satisfaction, not only with the speed, but also the courtesy in how people are treated. That was a victory. I think that was one of the great achievements of this administration, to have at the end of the term a positive opinion from our clients, from those who seek our services. That was very good.
Ambassador, regarding this aspect of courtesy, it really was a highlight. It's significant, isn't it? You have even mentioned to us at some point the measurement of this level of, let's say, gratitude, or I would say the quality of service for people who go to the consulate. Each of us who has to go there knows the result, which has been very positive. This has been a practice that you adopted based on the council itself. The consulate has a council, and I don't know if this is the case only at this consulate, but the fact that the consulate maintains a council and in a way is accountable to the community through the council for what is done, having participated in several councils before, I have never seen this kind of situation. In other words, you call on each of your department heads to report. Regarding this situation, is this innovation unique to Florida, or is it a rule that is being established? Then how do you manage to get the consulate staff who already work so much to have enough time to inform the community, also through the council, about what is being done?
Carla, the Citizens Council is an instrument that exists here in Miami, and it also exists in other consulates. We have consistently succeeded in maintaining this monthly regularity over time. It is important to note that this is not merely a formal consular body. Rather, it is a dedicated space for meaningful interaction between the consulate and the local Brazilian community. These meetings are formally presided over and led by a representative of Brazilian society. And as you mentioned, the practice I adopted was to bring in the team, the department heads, so that all the specific aspects of the consulate's work could be presented. Yes, as you mentioned, it does have the nature of an accountability session, but it also serves the purpose of receiving suggestions from the community and getting help from the community. The Citizens Council was absolutely essential. In 2022, and it will be essential again in 2026, it was crucial for bringing in Brazilian volunteers to work in the Brazilian election. The Brazilian election, the voting in the Brazilian presidential election that takes place in Florida, is the second largest for Brazil abroad. It is only surpassed by the voting in Portugal. So we need a lot of people to help us with this event. And it is the council that helps mobilize the Brazilian community for this. The council is a benchmark of satisfaction for us. The council conveys the message of what the community thinks about the consulate. Now we have established others. So, for example, Google Business Profile has that star rating system. We carried out a specific effort aimed at encouraging people to give their opinions about the consulate, because we wanted to improve our standing in that regard. And we succeeded. During the time we've been here on that scale from 0 to 5, we went from 3.5 to 4.6 stars. Excellent. And how did we achieve that? Not only by improving the service, but also by encouraging people. If you like the service, go on Google and say that you liked it, because otherwise it's just human nature. You end up being dominated by the minority opinions of those who didn't like it. And it worked out really well. But again, I think it's interesting for the community to see that the consulate not only wants to do a good job, it wants to be evaluated, it wants to hear opinions from the community. This is another area where I think the relationship between the consulate and the community has improved. And I think the Citizens Council played a big role in that.
Ambassador, in terms of numbers, you had a task to perform 4 years ago, and now you have a task that has multiplied. How many new collaborators were you able to add to the consulate, taking into account the increase in services and especially the improvement in service quality that we see today?
Carlo, the team is about the same size. It has not shown any particularly significant or noteworthy increase. I am currently attempting to recall from my memory if we actually had a distinct or substantial rise in any specific category. But I don't think so. I think that among diplomats and other officials from the Brazilian Foreign Service who came from Brasilia, as well as local hires, our number is the same or roughly the same. The change was in the way we organize our work and set priorities.
That's fantastic, because really the numbers you showed us for passports used to be around 500 and something, and now it's 2,000. And you have one of the lowest backlogs in the United States. That means something. In other words, the quality of service and dedication have improved. It shows leadership that got the consulate staff in some way to engage in this effort to provide good service to the community.
I think that for sure the team, they are aware of this, and not only are they aware, but they are also engaged. The team at the Miami consulate, and I'm talking about both the staff who came from Brazil and the locally hired employees, wants to provide good service. They want to serve well. These are people who enjoy the kind of work they do and want to have this positive result. Now, also looking a bit at the numbers, recognizing that we managed to accomplish a lot, it's also important to highlight that 2022 was still an unusual time because we were still somewhat coming out of the pandemic. So there was still a certain return to normalcy happening. And the numbers were still numbers that were dealing with the compression resulting from all the restrictions imposed in 2020 and 2021. Things were just starting to pick up again, and we caught that wave. But in fact, beyond resuming previous activities, we also sought out new areas of work. We developed the science and technology sector. We created the Brazilian women's space as a specific area of assistance. The space for Brazilian women has become a hub connecting people and organizations, which I think is very important within the community today, particularly for discussing issues of interest to Brazilian immigrant women in this jurisdiction. So I definitely think there has been some significant improvement, yes, but I also believe that a large part of it is simply a gradual return to normalcy, following the global pandemic we all experienced.
I see in the consulate, ambassador, it's the same concept that's implemented in the private sector and isn't so common in public service: commitment and ownership. I see that each person at the consulate now has this perspective, that they are responsible for their area and have a commitment to making it work. I have to make this clear, not just because you are present, that this depends on leadership, because public service, it depends a lot on the degree of relationship between those who lead and those who execute, so that these two values can be implemented. Now, the ambassador is going to Thailand. You are taking on a role in a beautiful, wonderful country with other challenges, of course, especially since you're going to Asia, which is now the center of the world's development challenges. What is your final word, ambassador, in this brief and short interview for our listeners?
Carlo, my final word is one of gratitude. I had positive expectations about the experience of working at the consulate, and the experience turned out to be even better. The work it was an incredibly diverse and multifaceted journey, and one that proved to be exceptionally challenging at every turn. But we always had the unwavering support and encouragement of the community in everything we did. Whenever a partnership was sought, that partnership materialized. So everything we did in commercial promotion, we noticed there is something unique here in Florida. The Brazilian entrepreneurs who are established here and who cover the entire thematic range of Florida's economy, this base is a source of experience for Brazilians who want to do business with Florida. So let's take advantage of this base. Let's make use of the experience of the Brazilian community here as a repository of experiences, knowledge, and guidance. And we organized matchmaking meetings with business entities in Brazil, with individual entrepreneurs, with the support of Sebrae, thanks to the desire and interest in participating from these Brazilians who live here. So in this work, or in the field of science and technology, talking to Brazilian doctors who are here, university professors, innovators, they want to contribute to building the relationship with Brazil. Citizens Council, the same thing. So my message today is truly one of deep gratitude, because for everything we proposed, the entire community responded to it with passion, often going far beyond our expectations. When the community freely developed an initiative, they would generously invite the consulate, and we got involved. It was truly a partnership. And I am certain that the foundations are solid for this to continue in the future. I believe it will continue, and I think this is not only positive for what is happening here in Florida, but it is also positive for me. I think it is a very good example of engagement between the Brazilian state and Brazilian society. I appreciate everything you said about my role here and what the team at the consulate has accomplished, but there is an interest from the Brazilian state behind this, and there is also a willingness from Brazilian society behind it. That is why it worked. And for me, it was absolutely exemplary. We always found goodwill, generosity, determination, and energy. So thank you. That is my message.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to share your experience, your success, which we must highlight in the management you carried out. It is a success that is reflected in your leadership with the team, that you led and motivated them, gave them responsibility and motivation, because along with the community, which is recognized by everyone, there is no one who cannot see this. And most importantly, this emotional connection that you brought between the community and the Brazilian state, regardless of any role or position, the community, through the work of the consulate, felt that the Brazilian state was supporting them and that they are part of the Brazilian state, not outcasts, but a group of people who are truly participants in the Brazil, which we all love. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your excellent leadership here. We wish you every success in your new mission in Thailand.
Thank you so much, Carlo. Thank you very, very much indeed. I truly want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity today. And I also want to express my deepest gratitude for all of the incredible support that you personally have always offered to us. And as always, please remember that the consulate's doors are always wide open for you.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, today we had the opportunity to interview someone who is truly admirable for everything he has done here. Taking advantage of the ambassador's absence, I want to give the testimony of a Brazilian who experienced the remarkable presence, I wouldn't say unique, but exemplary, of an ambassador who truly gave our diaspora that sense of country, of nationality. I would say that maybe not even the CBF gave Brazilians such a sense of rooting for things to work out as the community felt here, thanks to the support from the consulate. Stay with us. Next Tuesday, we will have an interesting program about how the Brazilian tax authority views those who are entrepreneurs here in the United States. What are the taxes and our responsibilities? Good night to everyone.